Hello and welcome along to the Property Academy podcast by Opus Partners. I'm your host, Stephen Knight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
And today's show, we're talking about interest rates. Are they going to go down by Christmas? And of course, the answer is, who the hell knows? Certainly not us. And so what did we do? We called up some of the top bank economists in the country. We called up ANZ, ASB, and Westpac, talked to all of their economics teams to ask the question, when do you guys actually think interest rates are going to come down? Because you're the ones who hold the keys to the kingdom and set the interest rates, along with market forces, of course. So what do you think the one-year rate's going to be in 6 months? What about in 12 months? When are interest rates actually going to come down? So we called them up to actually have that conversation. But just before we get into it, Andrew, I know you've got a bit of a bugbear when it comes to interest rates because they're already on their way down.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of people out there at the moment that think that we're still at the peak of the market. And I guess I can understand it because they feel really expensive at the moment because they are. They are expensive, right? But rates have been trending down for a while now. And if you look at some of the changes that we've had over the last wee while, the 1 year's gone from 7.33 down to 7.07. 2 years gone from 7.04 to 6.74.
And this is in the last 6 months, right? Over the last 6 months, we've seen about a 0.25% cut in the 1 year rate. A bit more, about a 0.3% cut in the 2 year rate.
And I guess my point is that you've actually seen quite a bit of decreases over the last 6 months. And then, you take the carded rate, the advertised rate, and you can probably get a bit of a discount off that as well, or most people can. And when you think about, okay, well, now you can get some banks giving 6.85% with a negotiated rate, that's down 0.55%. It's a big difference.
Yeah, that's interesting because at the peak of the market, the 1 year rate, the interest rate that you saw advertised on billboards and TV ads, ASB was up around that 7.4% mark at the moment. We're kind of saying the average was 7.33 at the peak of the market. Now, if you go to some of the banks, our mortgage advisors are getting it down to 6.85%. And when you say it's a 0.5% cut in those terms, it might not be for everybody watching this video or listening to this podcast, obviously, because we didn't all fix at 7.4%, but we are seeing some movement in the market already. I think that's important to acknowledge. And how much would that kind of interest rate cut save an investor on a mortgage?
So if you had a $500,000 mortgage, that's about $43 a week that you're saving now in interest. And, you might think, oh, that's not a lot of money, but that's twice as much as what we're getting in tax relief now with the new government tax cuts.
Oh, yeah, because it's about $20 a person.
Yeah, so when you put it into perspective, you're getting twice as much with what would be considered, a modest change in interest rates over a 6 month period.
Yeah, okay. But interest rates are still expensive, Andrew, of
Yeah.
course. So let's get straight into the good stuff and talk about where interest rates will be in about 6 months. So we're sitting here recording this in June 2024. So we're really talking about the end of the year, December 2024. So Westpac was saying that they think the 1 and 2 year rates in 6 months' time will be, the same to slightly lower than what they are now at the end of this year. ASB, they're currently at 7.14% for the 1 year rate. They don't think they're actually going to get much of a drop by the end of the year. And the same with ANZ, they're kind of saying 7% by the end of the year. So when you call up all of the bank economists, they're all really saying, look, we don't think there's going to be much of a cut in 2024. We think it'll happen next year in 2025.
So if I was the Reserve Bank, right, and I'm thinking about cutting interest rates, do you do that right before people go on holiday and start spending money, or do you wait till after that time so that it keeps the purse tight over the 2 months period that we maybe have a holiday?
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. We'll see what they end up doing. But let's talk about that year out. So what are they saying interest rates will be in a year's time? And I'll play you a clip of Kelly Eckhold, the chief economist at Westpac, with when he was talking to one of our journalists.
The 1 year rate at about, say, 670-ish or something like that. Like in the June, we've got a quarterly track there. It's at 665, for example, June next year. And the 2 year rate's at 6.5.
So what's your reaction to that, Andrew?
Yeah, well, I guess it's another 0.5% off the advertised rate. So, meaningful discounts, but relatively slow timeframes in which they're coming down.
Okay, so they reckon it's still going to be about 7% right through to the end of the year. Then early next year, we might see a 0.5% cut. They reckon the 1 year rate could be around that 6.65. the 2-year rate's 6.5. What's ASB saying? What about ANZ?
ASB pretty much the same, about 50 basis points down, so 6.64. ANZ are a bit more optimistic, so they say 6.4%, but again, what's 10 points in it? Not much.
Yeah, okay. So most of the banks are saying, look, we'll be 7%-ish right through to the end of the year. By the time we get to June next year, kind of 6.5% is a good ballpark. Now, I was actually quite pleased to hear that they were talking about those numbers because that lines up a lot with what I've been saying for a little while. So if I go to my own interest rate predictions on our website, I haven't updated these. I did these for the March years. We were kind of saying March, June next year, we think it'll be around that 6.5% mark. So that's kind of in the middle of what ASB, ANZ and Westpac are saying, which is quite good because I didn't know that. I didn't know they were going to say that before I made those predictions.
You're probably a bit more aggressive and aggressively high in your interest rate for the 1 year fixed rate for the next year.
Keeping it up just well above the 7%, yeah. But I do it on an annual basis rather than on a quarterly basis. So I feel pretty good about that. And even if you think about the kind of 1 year rate today versus the future, so we're kind of saying that you could negotiate 6.85% with some banks, not every bank. I mean, I just fixed for 1 year, I think at 7% recently because Westpac was not one of those banks that were really willing to discount at the moment. But let's say you could get to 6.85 today. You're able to get, let's call it 6.5% a year in the future. That's a 0.35% cut. That would save you about another $27 a week on a $500K principal and interest mortgage over 30 years. And so if you kind of say, well, the peak interest rate was 7.4, let's say we do get down to 6.5, that's about a $70 a week saving. Now, of course, not everybody fixed at 7.4%, but it's kind of that peak interest rate through to where we might be going a year into the future.
And I know a lot of investors are going to be thinking, oh, these rates still feel a bit high. So, you're talking 12 months out from now being around that 6.5%. It is still quite expensive at that stage. And the reason for that is the Reserve Bank has said domestic inflation is really, really sticky still. Now, we've talked before about domestic and imported inflation offsetting each other. And so they say, well, we kind of just care about the overall number. So why are they so focused on domestic inflation now?
Well, the main reason is that imported inflation has really fallen. So this is what we call tradables. So the last time the data was released, imported inflation was 1.6%, domestic inflation was 5.8%. And the obvious thing is, if imported inflation is down at 1.6%, there's not that much further that it can fall. So yes, the Reserve Bank only cares about, well, what is the actual inflation rate in the country? And can we get it between 1 to 3%? But recently, imported inflation has been doing all of the heavy lifting because it has been falling really quickly, while domestic inflation has been a bit more sticky. And so what they are now saying is, well, we've still got to keep the pressure on. We've still got to keep interest rates high to smash down that domestic inflation because we can't just rely on other countries cutting their inflation rate for us to achieve our goals. We've got to do something here in New Zealand.
And what do you put that down to, that it has remained so sticky over the last 6 months?
Well, recently, it's been actually a lot of that inflation has come from things that aren't actually impacted by interest rates. So at the moment, a big part of domestic inflation is rents going up because rents have been going up much faster than inflation, depending on where you are in the country. Some of them have been up around that 8%, some even 10%.
But wouldn't you argue that is because of interest rates, because landlords might be passing on the cost to...
Well, I've never agreed with that logic. I understand that, especially a lot of lobby groups for property investors say, oh, well, you don't want to increase the costs on landlords because then they're just going to put the rents up. And I kind of understand that to a small degree, but that's not really how it works. If you look at rental increases over the long term, it's really tracked towards tenants' incomes rather than landlords' costs. So I don't really think that it's interest rates are the big thing that's pushing up rents. I think it's that tenants' incomes have gone up. I think the other thing is we've had quite a lot of natural disasters probably about a year ago. That decreased the supply of rental properties. Some people obviously and places like the Hawke's Bay had to move out of their own homes. They had to move into rental accommodation, so that increased the demand for rentals. On top of that, we also saw rental accommodation become unlivable, so we had a decrease in the supply of rentals. So I think it says a lot more about the demand and supply of rentals, and also the incomes that tenants are earning rather than landlords' costs. So I don't think you can really mount an argument that, oh, well, if the Reserve Bank decreased the OCR and brought interest rates down, rents wouldn't go up so quickly, and therefore you'd have less inflation. No, low interest rates cause inflation, not the other way around.
Okay.
So take that, Andrew.
I was just trying to get a discount on our interest rates for us.
Nah, it's not going to happen. And I think that's why a lot of banks are on the same page when it comes to OCR cuts. Most people have got it penciled in for kind of early February 2025. The Reserve Bank is saying they're not going to cut to mid-2025. Treasury actually thinks they're going to cut before Christmas. Treasury expects that we'll see an OCR cut kind of November. But I've got a clip that I want to play you from Nick Tuffley. He is the one of the economists at ASB.
Look, in our view, it's going to be around February next year. The probability of a drop this year looks relatively low because inflation's just still looking too stubborn, particularly that more domestic related inflation. So we do think February's the most realistic timing. The risks around that, it's probably slightly later rather than slightly earlier.
And I should say as well that Tony Alexander, old Papa T, who we haven't talked about on the show for a little while.
I thought you'd fallen out of love or something.
Oh,
I thought you'd had a lover's spat.
I'm a long-term lover.
Enjoy that, Tony, if you're listening.
He's not listening.
No.
He was saying that he actually also thinks that the OCR cut will happen, first one in November. The reason he's doing that is he's sitting there, Tony Alexander, independent economist, he does all of these surveys to people asking, well, do you expect to spend more? Do you expect to spend less? Are you going to invest more? Are you going to invest less? So and that gives him a lot of data that most people don't have access to.
Rather than waiting for the data to come out, he's actually seeing how people's behaviour is changing now.
Yeah, well, rather than saying, did people spend more? Did people spend less? He's asking people, are you going to spend more? Are you going to spend less? So he does get that kind of early indicator, even if it might not be as accurate, because what's more accurate is what people actually do, not what they say they're going to do. But by understanding what people say they're going to do, he gets a fairer idea. Now, he's saying, look, the economy's pretty weak out there. People don't want to go out and spend a lot of money at the moment. That's going to make the economy very weak. That's going to bring inflation down. Therefore, he thinks that interest rate cut will happen a little bit earlier. And what's quite interesting is I once said to him, Tony, do you ever look at other economists' forecasts when you're making your own? He says, no, never do that, because you don't want to be swayed by what other people are saying. Like, you want to look at your own data, come to your own assessment, and then
compare.
Once you've made that, you then might make that comparison. So when do you think it's going to happen, Andrew, in terms of an OCR cut, interest rates coming down?
I reckon you're going to see banks cut interest rates sooner than the OCR cuts come through, because when we get to the end of winter where, historically it might be a bit of a quieter time for banks and interest rates are high at the moment, so people are less likely to be refinancing off lower interest rates, I think there's going to want to be some stimulus in lending, and so banks will start to discount interest rates.
Cool. Right, let's wrap it up there. But please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It really does help us get the message out to more people. And hey, if you're listening to the audio version on your podcast app, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, you want to see some of the clips that we've played today, or look at some of our graphs, just head to our YouTube channel. Google Opus Partners YouTube. It'll be the first thing that comes up. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We release new videos every Monday and Wednesday on here. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Knight.
And I'm Andrew Nicholl.
We're going to be back here tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most out of the New Zealand property market. Until next time.